Well, hey everybody, this is April 5th, and I want to welcome you to this edition of Living Power, your online Bible study. We are walking through the Bible in a year. We are in the book of Judges, and we're just about finished. It only took us about a week to get through the book of Judges, and I don't know about you, but I'm kind of glad about that because the it's just not my favorite book. I don't know about you, but it's just not my favorite. And I'm excited about the next one that we're going to be studying. We're going to be looking at Ruth coming up in just a couple of days. And I'm really excited about that. I'm also really excited that I have a new number to report to you. It's April 5th, and we just started in January. And when we started, we had 32 people registered for the class the very first day. And today we have 176. So I want to thank you so much for telling your friends, telling your family, and whoever you're telling about the class, and your kind words. And we're growing as a class. So I'd like to see more people commenting on the blog posts at the end of the day. That's not it's not hard, and it doesn't have to be anything super theological that you write, but it can be just a word of affirmation or just, hey, I'm part of the class, loving it. Just whatever you feel led, because remember, something that you say that day might just be the thing that someone else needs to hear in the class. And I love it when you all kind of talk to each other, because remember, now we're an online class and we are spread out all over the place. I know that there are husbands and wives that are taking the class, and I know of a story where the husband is traveling and they wanted to take a class together, but they could not because he was traveling so much. So this provided a Bible study that they could do together. I know of daughters, mothers, and grandmothers who live in different towns that are taking the study because it's something that they can do together. And they live so far apart, they never thought that they could do that before. We have a high schooler, a couple of high schoolers, one in particular that is a good friend of mine, and she does her lesson. She's 16 years old, and she does her lesson every morning before she goes to high school. Now, talk about a woman of faith. Is that not wonderful that she does this? She gets up early to do this, and I just love her to death, and I think that's wonderful. So we have lots of stories of different people in the class, and we're up to 172 now, so continue to tell your friends about it as the Lord leads you, and we'll just see what happens. In our reading today, we are finishing up the story of Samson and Delilah. This is a story that you've probably heard if you went to Sunday school as a child. There is a video that I'm going to try to remember to post that your kids might want to see. It's got some little toy characters in it, but it tells the story of Samson and Delilah. So I may forget to post that, but if I do, it's one that you can share with your kids. And Samson never really freed Israel from the oppression of the Philistines. They continued to bother and oppress Israel for a long time. In his death, he killed more of the people than he had in his whole life. And he's actually listed as a hero of faith in Hebrews chapter 11 because his strength came from God, and he knew at the end of his life that his strength did come from God, and he acknowledged him at the end of his life. God's Spirit was at work in him to give him strength and success in his battle, and God used his quirky personality, his anger, to do his will and to judge the Philistines, and that was the plan of God for Samson. Samson removes Gaza, the city of Gaza's gates. Now these city gates are huge, so he has to have superhuman strength to be able to do that, and I think I put a picture up on the blog today for you about that. That's kind of a neat picture. He does get tangled up with another woman, Delilah, who ends up being his downfall, but he has final victory in the end. Reading the story at first glance, it doesn't look like that, but if you look in the Bible, it does title it Samson's final victory, so that's how we'll interpret that. you can read the story about Samson and Delilah, and then you go into Judges chapter 17. Now, in our Bible, there's a little a sentence in smaller text that you'll probably almost miss if I didn't point it out. And it's on page 388, right before Judges 17 starts. And it says, the events of Judges 17 to 21, those chapters, occurred sometime early in the period of Judges. So I'm not really sure why this Bible didn't put these chapters ahead. They should have actually been placed at the beginning of Judges, before Judges chapter 1. Because as you read here, you'll kind of recognize Dan taking over Laish, and you'll just see, we've already read about that in the book of Joshua. And why is it here? Because we're reading about things 300 years after the book of Joshua closed. Well, the tribe of Dan took over the city of Laish actually much, much earlier. So just be aware that the chronological order might be a little bit off here in what we're reading. We read about Micah, and this is just to show us the lawlessness that was happening in Israel at the time. You'll read about 200 shekels. That's equal to I won't say a couple, I'll say several $100,000. I don't know how many exactly. But when you read about Michael's idols and this Levite priest who comes to be his personal priest, what's wrong with that story? Well, first of all, the Levite priests were to serve Yahweh, not any other god. You weren't supposed to be a personal priest to someone. You were only supposed to serve Yahweh. And you're not supposed to make carved idols out of anything. And I learned today in my studies that you fashion a carved image out of wood, and you fashion a cast idol out of hot metal poured into a mold. So I thought that was kind of interesting. At the end of our reading today, the tribe of Dan is fighting, and they're using Michael's idols to gain them the victory. So we've come a long way from God fighting for the tribes, and now we see a tribe of Dan, and if you look on the map, it's the northernmost tribe of all the land. They're using these idols and his priest to attack Laish. They set up this carved image and they worship it while the tabernacle is set up at Shiloh. And this is going to be important from a historical perspective to remember, because we're going to get into the time of the kings with Israel, and then after that we're going to have the tribes split into civil war. And something horrible is going to happen up here in the tribe of Dan, in this very area. And you think this is bad, it just gets worse. And it gets worse for all of Israel because of what's happening here in Dan. So I want you to see Dan as a place of idolatry and a real problem area. They established Jonathan as priest, which extended until his descendants went into exile, it said. So they are starting some idolatrous worship that lasts a really, really, really long time. And this worship is opposed to the true worship. So God certainly is not pleased at seeing these turn of events. In the reading today, it says there was no longer a theocracy in Israel. We see the tribes were divided. The people were mixing with the heathen peoples. And in 17 verse 6 it says, in those days Israel had no king, and all the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. This is really a problem. And tomorrow in our reading I'm going to summarize for you the book of Judges and really what's happened over these few hundred years, what the real problem is, and some of the signs. So tomorrow's going to be a summary of the book of Joshua. In the reading, you're going to see tomorrow a civil war that takes place. So the tribes are fighting against one another, and it's pretty bad. So here we are concluding the book of Judges, and we need something to happen to give us some hope. And we're going to see that in the next book that we're going to start here in 2 days, which will be the book of Ruth. So I think you're really going to enjoy that. So that's it for today. I will see you again tomorrow, and we'll wrap up the book of Judges. Blessings, everyone. See you then.